There's a stretch of road in the middle of nowhere, just blacktop that cuts through endless miles of barren plains and truck stops so lonely you can feel the emptiness seep into your bones. Truckers call it Devil's Strip, a place notorious for strange disappearances and bad luck. But lately the rumors have turned darker. They say there's a woman, a hitchhiker, or sometimes a prostitute, depending on who's telling the story, who lures truckers to their doom. The truckers call her the Highway Siren. Rick had been driving his rig for 14 hours straight. The caffeine pills were barely keeping him awake as his headlights cut through the darkness. He pulled into a rest stop around 3 a.m., a place so run down it looked like it had been forgotten by time. The diner was closed, the gas station lights flickered, and a single truck sat parked in the far corner, abandoned looking. Rick wasn't planning to linger. Just grab a quick nap and be back on the road. But as he adjusted his seat for a snooze, someone tapped on his window. She was standing there, silhouetted by the neon glow of the flickering gas station sign. A petite woman, mid-30s maybe, with long wild black hair and a face that was beautiful but weary, like she'd seen too much of life. Her lips curled into a smile, friendly but with a hint of something he couldn't quite place. "Need some company?" she asked, her voice smooth and sweet. She wore a tattered leather jacket over a dress that was too thin for the chilly night air. Rick hesitated. It wasn't the first time he'd been approached by a prostitute, but something about her gave him pause. Still, loneliness and fatigue clouded his judgment. "Yeah, sure, hop in," he said, forcing a grin. The woman introduced herself as Lila. She had a calm, hypnotic presence, and Rick found himself talking more than he expected, sharing stories about his kids, his wife, and life on the road. She listened intently, her dark eyes studying him as if he were an insect under glass. "You seem like a good man, Rick," she said after a while. Her tone shifted, lower now, almost serious. "But not all truckers are. You know that, right?" Rick nodded slowly. "Yeah, there's some bad ones out there." She leaned closer, her breath warm against his neck. "What would you do if someone hurt someone like me? Would you stop them?" Rick frowned. Of course, nobody deserves that kind of treatment. For a fleeting moment, her smile turned predatory. "Good answer." As the hours dragged on, Rick started to feel uneasy. He noticed little things. A faint chemical smell on her hands, the way she avoided the light of his cab's dashboard, and the way she seemed to know a little too much about the road and the truckers who traveled it. "You ever hear about those disappearances on Devil's Strip?" Lila asked, her tone casual but probing. Rick stiffened. "Yeah, I've heard rumors. Creepy stuff. Some guys say it's the cartel. Others think it's just bad luck." She laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Bad luck? Sure, let's call it that." Rick's stomach knotted. "What's that supposed to mean?" Her smile faded and her eyes turned cold. "It means sometimes bad people get what they deserve." Rick's instincts screamed at him to get her out of the truck. He pulled over under the guise of needing to check his tires. "Be right back," he muttered, grabbing his flashlight. When he stepped outside, the cold air hit him like a slap. As he walked around the truck, he noticed something odd. His back tires were fine, but a thick smear of what looked like dried blood streaked across the rear bumper. His pulse quickened. Suddenly, the cab door slammed shut. Rick whipped around to see Lila in the driver's seat, holding a knife. His knife, the one he kept in the glove compartment. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice ice cold now. The sweet hitchhiker facade was gone, replaced by something primal and terrifying. Rick backed away slowly, his hands raised. "Look, lady, I don't know what you're planning, but let's talk about this." "Talk?" she sneered. "You're all the same. You talk a big game about being the good guy, but when push comes to shove, you look the other way." She stepped out of the truck, advancing on him. Her knife glinted in the moonlight. "You don't even recognize me, do you? Typical. You probably don't remember the girl from that rest stop in Amarillo, or the one in Tulsa, but I remember. I remember what you all did to me." Rick's mind raced. He didn't know what she was talking about, but it didn't matter. The way she looked at him, like a hunter sizing up her prey, made it clear there was no reasoning with her. Rick turned and ran, his boots pounding against the gravel. He could hear her footsteps behind him, fast and relentless. He made it to the next truck parked at the rest stop and pounded on the door, screaming for help. But no one answered. Her laughter echoed in the night, a chilling sound that froze Rick in his tracks. "Go ahead, run. It won't matter. I'll find you." And she did. By the time the sun rose, Rick's truck was still idling in the parking lot, its engine humming like a tombstone marker. No one saw him again. The snow felt thick and heavy as Brian's SUV crawled up the winding road to the family cabin in Colorado. Inside the car, his wife, Emily, hummed along with a Christmas tune playing on the radio, while their daughter, Lily, dozed in the back seat, her face peaceful in the glow of the holiday lights strung across the dashboard. This trip was meant to be special, a chance to reconnect after a rough year. The mountain air, the warmth of the cabin, and the promise of uninterrupted family time were just what they needed. As they reached the cabin, Brian exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. It looked perfect, nestled in the trees with smoke curling lazily from the chimney. Inside, their extended family was already there: Brian's brother Jack, his wife Anna, and their teenage son Cole. The smell of roasting turkey and fresh pine greeted them as they stepped inside, and laughter filled the cozy space. The evening was lively. The family gathered around the fire, swapping stories, playing board games, and sipping hot cocoa. Lily, being only 6, was the center of everyone's attention. She twirled around the room in her red holiday dress, giggling as her Uncle Jack teased her about how many marshmallows she could fit into her cocoa. The storm outside intensified, the wind howling like a living thing. At some point, Brian thought he heard a faint knock at the door, but when he glanced over, no one else seemed to notice. He shrugged it off. As the night wore on, Lily grew tired. Emily took her upstairs, tucking her into bed with promises of snowmen and sledding the next morning. The family stayed up a little longer, the festive mood finally winding down as the storm outside roared. When Emily went to check on Lily later that night, she found her bed empty. At first, she thought nothing of it. Lily was prone to wandering and often came downstairs for water or to find her stuffed bunny. But when Emily returned to the living room, Lily wasn't there. "Brian?" Emily's voice wavered, catching his attention immediately. "Have you seen Lily?" Brian's heart dropped. "She's not in bed?" The family fanned out through the cabin, calling her name. They checked every room, every closet, even outside on the porch despite the blizzard. But there was no sign of her. And then Brian saw it. The front door slightly ajar, snow blowing in through the crack. Panic gripped the family as they realized Lily was gone. Brian threw on his coat and boots, rushing out into the snow despite Emily's pleas. Jack and Cole followed him, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "She wouldn't just wander off," Emily sobbed, clutching Anna's arm. "Someone must have taken her." Brian's mind raced as he slogged through the knee-deep snow. Who would do this? They were miles from the nearest town, isolated in the mountains. As the wind screamed around them, he caught a glimpse of something. Tracks in the snow. "Over here!" Brian shouted, his voice barely audible over the storm. The tracks were faint but unmistakable. A man's boots, heading into the woods, and smaller prints beside them. Lily's. The tracks led deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the snow seemed to absorb all sound. Brian's flashlight flickered, and for a moment he thought he saw movement ahead, a shadow slipping between the trees. "Lily!" he yelled, his voice hoarse. A faint cry answered him, a child's voice, distant but unmistakable. His heart pounded as he sprinted toward the sound, Jack and Cole struggling to keep up. The cry came again, closer this time. He stumbled into a clearing and saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. A man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a long coat that billowed in the wind. In his arms was Lily, her small frame limp against his chest. "Hey!" Brian roared, charging forward. But the man turned and disappeared into the shadows, moving with an unnatural swiftness. For hours, Brian and Jack searched the woods, but the storm grew worse, obliterating the tracks and muffling any sound. Exhausted and frozen, they returned to the cabin empty-handed. Emily was inconsolable. "We need to call the police!" she screamed, her voice raw with desperation. Jack tried to reason with her. "There's no cell service out here, Emily. We'll have to wait for morning." "No!" she cried. "She doesn't have until morning." Brian sat in silence, his hands trembling as he stared at the door. Something about the man had unsettled him. The way he moved, the way he seemed to vanish into the woods. It wasn't natural. As dawn broke, the storm subsided, revealing the landscape blanketed in fresh snow. Brian and Jack ventured out again, this time armed with shovels and flares. Near the edge of the forest, they found something chilling. A small scrap of fabric, torn from Lily's dress, snagged on a low branch. Not far from it, a wooden sign was planted in the snow. The words carved into it made Brian's blood run cold. "She's mine now." Desperation gave Brian strength. Ignoring Jack's protests, he followed the trail past the sign, deeper into the forest. After what felt like hours, he came upon a decrepit shack hidden among the trees. Smoke rose from its chimney, and the faint sound of Lily crying pierced the air. Inside, the man was seated by a fire, humming a haunting tune. Lily sat in a chair, her hands bound but otherwise unharmed. Her wide eyes filled with terror when she saw her father. Brian didn't hesitate. He burst through the door, tackling the man to the ground. They fought viciously, the man's strength almost inhuman. But Brian's rage won out. He grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace and brought it down on the man's head. The man crumpled, his body unnaturally still. Brian scooped Lily into his arms and ran, not looking back. When he returned to the cabin, Emily collapsed in relief, clutching Lily tightly. Jack contacted the authorities as soon as they reached an area with cell service, but when the police arrived at the shack, it was empty. No body, no sign anyone had ever been there. Weeks later, as the family tried to move on, Brian couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. And then one night he found a note taped to their front door. This isn't over. The silent knock would haunt them forever. It was a tranquil night on December 20th, 1968, in the small town of Benicia, California. High school sweethearts Betty Lou Jensen and David Faraday decided to spend their evening together. They parked Faraday's Rambler station wagon on a secluded stretch of Lake Herman Road, a popular lover's lane for local teenagers. As the two sat talking, the serenity of the evening was shattered. A man approached their car, his shadowy figure illuminated briefly by the car's headlights. What happened next remains a chilling mystery. Evidence later revealed that the man ordered the couple out of the car at gunpoint. David Faraday was shot execution-style in the head, while Betty Lou Jensen attempted to flee. She was gunned down, her lifeless body found approximately 28 feet from the car. There were no witnesses, no suspects, and no known motive. This brutal double murder was the beginning of a reign of terror that would grip Northern California for years to come. 7 months later, on July 4th, 1969, the killer struck again. Darlene Farron, a vivacious 22-year-old, and her friend, 19-year-old Michael Majot, parked at Blue Rock Springs Park in Vallejo, California. It was a quiet spot for couples to escape the crowds, but that night, their private moment was interrupted. Shortly before midnight, a car pulled up beside them. A man emerged with a flashlight and a 9mm Luger. Without warning, he opened fire, shooting both Darlene and Michael multiple times. Despite his injuries, Michael survived the attack, later providing law enforcement with a vague description of their assailant. A stocky man, approximately 5'8", with short, light brown hair. Shortly after the shooting, a chilling call was made to the Vallejo Police Department. The voice on the other end of the line confessed to the crime. "I want to report a double murder. If you go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The caller's tone was calm, almost detached. Investigators traced the call to a phone booth near a gas station, but the man was long gone. On July 31st, 1969, 3 newspapers, the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner, received nearly identical letters. The writer claimed responsibility for the Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs murders. Each letter contained 1/3 of a cryptogram, a cipher consisting of 408 symbols. The author demanded the ciphers be published on the front pages of the newspapers, threatening further killings if his demands were not met. The letters began with the chilling salutation, "This is the Zodiac speaking." It was the first time the killer identified himself, and the moniker would become synonymous with fear. Within days, a couple from Salinas, California, cracked the cipher. It read, "I like killing people because it is so much fun. It is more fun than killing wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all to kill." The message revealed the twisted psychology of a predator who saw murder as sport. However, the cryptogram provided no clues about the killer's identity. On September 27, 1969, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a peaceful afternoon at Lake Berryessa, a scenic area north of Napa. While picnicking on the shore, they noticed a man watching them from a distance. He wore a black hood over his head, adorned with a white crosshair symbol on the chest. He approached them, brandishing a gun. The man claimed to be an escaped convict and needed their car and money to flee to Mexico. He tied them up with pre-cut lengths of clothesline, then produced a knife. Brian was stabbed 6 times, Cecilia was stabbed 10. The attacker then casually walked back to their car, using a black marker to scrawl his symbol and the dates of his previous crimes on the door. Cecilia managed to give a description of the attacker before succumbing to her injuries 2 days later. Brian miraculously survived but was unable to provide further details. That evening, the Zodiac called the Napa County Sheriff's Office, reporting the attack in his now familiar detached tone. On October 11, 1969, the Zodiac shifted tactics. Paul Stein, a 29-year-old cab driver, picked up a fare in San Francisco's bustling Union Square. The passenger directed him to the upscale Presidio Heights neighborhood. Upon arrival, the passenger shot Stein in the head, took his wallet and keys, and tore a piece of Stein's bloodied shirt. This brazen murder was initially thought to be a routine robbery, until the Zodiac mailed a letter to the San Francisco Chronicle days later. Enclosed was a swatch of Stein's shirt, proving his involvement. The Zodiac claimed he planned to target schoolchildren next, causing widespread panic. Over the next few years, the Zodiac sent dozens of letters, taunting law enforcement and the public. He boasted of killings, offered cryptic clues, and mocked the police for their inability to catch him. In one of his most infamous letters, he wrote, "I am not afraid of the gas chamber because it will send me to paradise all the sooner." Despite an exhaustive investigation involving thousands of suspects and numerous theories, the Zodiac's true identity eluded authorities. The killer claimed responsibility for 37 murders, though only 5 have been definitively linked to him. The Zodiac investigation produced a long list of suspects, but no definitive answers. Among the most prominent was Arthur Lee Allen, a Vallejo resident with a criminal record and a history of erratic behavior. Allen was implicated based on circumstantial evidence, including his possession of a Zodiac-branded watch and his proximity to several crime scenes. However, DNA evidence and handwriting analysis failed to conclusively link him to the murders. Other suspects ranged from fringe conspiracy theories to plausible individuals with eerie connections to the case. Yet no arrests were ever made. The Zodiac Killer's reign of terror left an indelible mark on American culture. His cryptic ciphers, eerie letters, and chilling modus operandi inspired countless books, movies, and television series.